Om Ajnanam Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksururmilidam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Vasudevasutam Devam Kansachanuramardanam Devaki Param Anandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Jai Sri Krishna. Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum means Lord Krishna is the Guru of this whole world because he is the greatest teacher. Why is that? Because he not only tells us what we should do, he also tells us what are the obstacles that prevent us from doing what we should do and how to overcome them. Such a great teacher. He tells you what to do, what problems you will face, and how to solve them. So that is why in chapter 3, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, go, do your prescribed duty, but with detachment, so that you don't face the reactions and there will be no sin, because you're doing it as a sacrifice. But he also tells Arjuna that when you are doing this, you are actually undertaking two duties. One is duty in a material world, duty towards family, duty towards community, duty towards society, duty based on your own skill and capabilities. But while you're doing that, while you are undertaking your prescribed duties, you're also purifying your consciousness. That is your spiritual duty. Because the Atma, the soul, is eternally connected to Krishna. That is the position of the soul. There is this link that goes on forever. So it's so beautiful. Karma yoga means performing your duties and at the same time purifying yourself. But there is a problem. People don't engage in prescribed duties. People commit sin. Why? Why do people hurt each other? Why do people kill, murder, cheat, rape? Why? What is the reason for this? We see this all over the world every time we watch the newspaper, we watch the TV, read the newspaper. It's always full of sinful activities all over the world. Why? This again is explained very lovely manner by Lord Krishna, who talks about it as really a manifestation of what we call a desire to satisfy the own senses and not the senses of the Lord. And this is called lust. So that is the roadblock. That is the problem. How to solve it? We see it all around us. Even we sometimes, we do things for our own benefit, to satisfy our own senses. And how do you overcome this problem? What is the solution to this problem? That's what we're going to talk about today. It's very, very interesting. And I hope you will enjoy this session. And I'm going to speak basically on what has been discussed in the Bhagavad Gita. And I'll be going through step by step so that hopefully we all can enjoy this journey of learning to understand what was the message that Lord Krishna gave to Arjuna in terms of how to overcome this lust and actually convert it into pure love. So let's see what we are going to talk about. All right? Yes, I got a question. Somebody's hand was up. No question? Okay, never mind. Let's just go on. So this is a very interesting, lovely session we're going to have. And it's going to talk about basically the enemies of the soul. Now, why do we say enemy of the soul? Because the soul is actually connected intimately to the Lord. It is meant to serve the Lord. It is meant to relish the joys of doing so. But when something prevents the soul from undertaking its duty, it becomes the enemy. And this enemy is lust. So we're going to talk about lust in the context of what is the obstacle in terms of specifically who is the enemy. We're going to describe it in detail to understand this word better. And then we'll try to figure out why is it an enemy? And then Lord Krishna will suggest to Arjuna how to overcome this. Just like, in a war, when you want to win a war, you must know where the enemy is, where they're hiding, so that you can determine how to attack them. So Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna, where does the enemy reside? Now, where is this lust hiding now? And once you know where the lust is residing, then you can destroy the enemy. So that is a gist of what we'll be covering today. So as I was talking about just now, we were talking about karma yoga, where it's renunciation and taking action that helps purify the soul, but there is an enemy, that is lust. And we have to conquer it by deliberate spiritual intelligence. Now, what is this meaning of spiritual intelligence? Now, when I use the word intelligence, we all hear it all the time. But what is the meaning of the word intelligent? When you say my son is very intelligent, that person is very intelligent, in a very specific sense, it means that person can, when he receives any information, that person can investigate deeper, find out, really, is this true? Is it false? Is it based on fallacy? Is it a fact? And then he can make a distinction and discriminate between true and false and then make the right decision. So intelligence is the capacity to make the right decision based on investigation and discrimination in a general sense. Now, what is spiritual intelligence? Now, when we look at issues from the spiritual perspective, we are talking about how we can investigate to find out the truth. What is the truth? What is Satyam? Who am I? What is real? Who is the soul? That is investigate, establishing the truth. And in order to establish the truth about the soul, it's necessary to discriminate between matter and spirit, differentiate between body and soul. And this needs a lot of knowledge. So that is what we mean by intelligence. The ability to make decisions based on investigation and discrimination. In the context of spiritual intelligence, investigate means finding out the truth about who you really are, why you are here, what is the purpose of existence, and discriminate between what is real, what is not real, what is temporary, what is eternal. So we have understood the word spiritual intelligence. So now let's go in a bit deeper, because this was actually discussed in chapter 2 when Lord Krishna talked about Buddhi Yoga. And very nicely now he's discussing that intelligence in this context. Okay, let's move on. So now in life, we make decisions about choices. We have to make choices all the time. When we are young, when you're growing up, when we are old, everything in life is a battle between two things. One choice we make is about sense gratification of the ego self. Now, ego self means the self with regard to the body. We decide the body is the ego that controls the body. We want to satisfy the senses. That's one distinction. And the other choice has to do with realization of the soul self. Now, we're going to decide, are we going to gratify our senses, or realize who we truly are. That's very important decision to make. And when we somehow get caught up with material desires, with emotional desires, with intellectual desires, these desires somehow cannot be fulfilled, and they become bigger, become very intense, and become bigger until they become what we call develop cravings, and sometimes even addiction. So small desire can lead to intense desire, lead to a craving, and this craving makes people addicted to things like gambling, addicted to things like intoxication, addicted to things like sensual pleasures. Now, once they're addicted, then all their life, they will be only engaging in sense gratification as if that is the whole purpose of life. And when they do that, they find that they cannot break out of that addiction. They feel a sense of shame, guilt, and self-pity because they can't beat it. The system is too strong. Then this will weaken their intelligence, weaken their ability to discriminate between body and soul, weaken their ability to investigate about their true nature. But when you're trying to realize who you truly are, this requires a very strong spiritual intelligence. So you see, when you're going in this direction, we're trying to gratify the senses. Because you are gratifying the senses, your intelligence is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, and doesn't allow you to go this direction. That is the problem. Let's understand this concept a little bit deeper with a simple example. Let's say we are having a situation where we see a weak person drowning. See, this person is drowning, and he drowns very easily because he's very weak, cannot swim, no strength, drowns. But a strong person, you see what happens? He can swim, he has a life vest, he survives. Now, why am I showing this example? You see that sea actually represents the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease, which we all have to go through. We all will die one day, we all will be old one day, we could have disease, and these are miseries of life. The weak person here signifies one with weak spiritual intelligence. So he's easily caught into this miseries. The one with a strong person with life vest signifies a person with strong spiritual intelligence. Now that life vest this person is wearing, what does that signify? It signifies a support mechanism. Sadhu Sangha, Sadhana, Swadhaya. Sadhu Sangha means sadhu's association of devotees, association of people who are serving the Lord. Sadhana is spiritual practice, and Swadhaya is scriptures. That is the life vest. So in short, when we move towards sense gratification of the ego self, the intelligence weakens, and this is a result of lust. And lust is really the reason why people commit sins and cannot help it. So let's now look at this word in a bit more detailed manner. What does this really mean? Lust is actually a thirst to please oneself. It is existing when a person feels emptiness, dissatisfaction inside. Because lust is an endeavor to fill up that emptiness and remove that dissatisfaction. Feel empty, feel dissatisfied, we're not getting what we want, so we want to do something to fill up that. Because we want to thirst to please oneself, but this lust cannot be defeated. But in the face of love, it disappears. Why? Because love is the natural state of existence, and lust is a permutation that occurs only when existence is projected in some unnatural condition. What does that mean? It means spirit soul is full of bliss. It is conscious, and it is eternal. That bliss is there because of the love, the pure love for the Lord. Now, when that love cannot be fulfilled because of the material nature we are in, it then permutes, it changes into lust. So what happens then is the personal energy is absorbed in suppressing, hiding, filtering, denying, compensating for this dark side we all have. And we cannot empathize, we cannot see ourselves in others. And this is the problem. So what happens is, because one is unable to overcome these shameful feelings, all feelings become stifled. And one becomes a stranger to oneself under the control of the false ego. So you see how the false ego takes over your life, takes over control of us because of the desire to satisfy, to gratify our senses of sight, of smell, of taste, of sound, for our own pleasure. We must understand that the chariot is like the body. The passenger in the chariot is the soul. The charioteer, the person who is running the chariot, is the intellect, intelligence, who is holding the reins. The reins are connected to the horses, and the horses are the senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch. That is how the whole system works. Now, when we look at this, we see there's intelligence, there is the mind, there are senses, and there is the soul. What is the relationship between all of this? There is a hierarchy. The super soul is Lord Krishna, who is in the heart as Paramatma. And then there is the soul. Both of these are spiritual. The ego, intelligence, and mind are material, spiritualized, if and only if they are guided in accordance with doing prescribed duties. And they are above the senses and the body. So this is the hierarchy. Now, what is important to understand is the soul is above the mind. In other words, it's a higher hierarchy, and the soul has to ensure that the intelligence, this intelligence, is used to support the soul, to make the soul connect with the super soul. But the intelligence is weak. So what happens? The mind is easily influenced by the senses. So this is what happens. The mind goes all over the place, and we just blindly follow. We talked about this in day one. You are a prisoner of your mind because your intellect is weakened and the senses go wild. This is why we lose control. This is why lust is taking us away from our true purpose. But why is it an enemy? What's wrong with this? Why can't we just enjoy our life? Why can't we just do what we do? That's an interesting question. Youngsters will say, oh, what's wrong with going to a disco, having drinks, having fun? Nothing wrong with that. Well, there is a problem. The problem is it leads to degradation. It means you go on a lower species. You lose the true purpose of your life. You lose the whole point of living, and that is to reach out to Lord Krishna and connect back with him as his eternal servant. That is your position. But a more practical problem is that it is never satisfied. You can never satisfy lust. It's like pouring fuel into a fire. The more fuel you put, the bigger the fire gets. So it's a never winning game. But the real problem with lust is that it weakens the intelligence. Now I'm going to talk about weak and strong intelligence. What happens when you have a weak intelligence? When your intelligence is weak, you become dependent on immediate gratification. You want it. And when you are dependent on immediate gratification, you become helpless and desensitized. You don't know what to do. You just need to be gratified. You need to gamble. You need to be intoxicated. You need this, you need that. And after some time, people feel lonely and resentful, hides in secrecy, identifies with perversion, becomes in a state of no, I'm good, there's no such thing, I'm not this, I'm not that, denial, and then finally avoids pain and copes using pleasure. What pleasure? Again, back to gratification. So you see, it's like a continuous process that takes you to this whole continuous vicious cycle. Over time weakens the intelligence. That is because of lust, the desire to satisfy own senses. That is the problem. Let's look at it from the other point of view. What happens if you have strong intelligence? Instead of being dependent on immediate gratification, you are delight only in absolute truth. Instead of being helpless and desensitized, you are powerful and responsible. Instead of feeling lonely and resentful, you are connected with the Lord and never hurt. Instead of hiding in secrecy, you shine with love for others. Instead of identifying with perversion, you are pure and untouched by matter. Instead of being in denial, one is genuine. Instead of avoiding pain and coping with pleasure, one trusts Krishna in all dualities and therefore delights only in absolute truth. And can you see how powerful this is? How powerful it is to have a strong intelligence. And this strong intelligence builds and develops into love. That is love. That is pure love. Because lust is occurring when we seek material pleasure, pleasure of the senses, that's lust. But when we seek spiritual pleasure, we want to look for the pleasure of Krishna, that is love. And that's a big difference. Are we looking for satisfying our own personal senses? Are we willing to be a slave of our own senses and be caught in this cycle that brings our and weakens our intelligence? Or do we want to satisfy the senses of the Lord and strengthen our intelligence? That is the point. Now, we know obviously that it's better to love than to be lustful. But why do people engage in this seeking of pleasures? Why do they do such things? Why do they do this and actually commit sin? This is a question asked by Arjuna in text 36. Why? Why, Krishna? Why? Well, it's because living entities are originally spiritual, pure, free from contamination, because they are part and parcel of Lord Krishna. But when they come in contact with material nature, they then become controlled by material nature. They become tamasic, rajasic, and they act in very sinful ways without hesitation, sometimes acts against own will as if by force. Now, is this impelled by the super soul within? I mean, are you saying that the Lord is causing them to do this? What is causing them to do this? That's Arjuna's concern. If you say the soul is spiritual, why would the soul engage in this kind of activities? Why would it engage in lustful activities? That's a great question. And answer is this. You see, when we are talking about lust, this is what forces people to act sinfully, and this is the all-devouring sinful enemy. And lust is nothing but the result of the living entity coming in contact with material nature. It's like being in contact with the modes of passion, which transforms into wrath. You see, it's like milk. When you put sour tamarind, it becomes yogurt. The milk is pure, but when you put sour tamarind, it becomes yogurt. So eternal love, which is our constitutional position, that's what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to love the Lord eternally, is converted to lust because of the exposure to material nature. That is why people commit sin, and that is why lust exists. Now, the next question is, where did it come from? What is the origin? What happens when it is satisfied? What happens not satisfied? The origin of lust is the Supreme Lord, because he is the Lord, he is the creator of everything. He created the material universe, he created Prakriti, he created everything. So he is the creator, yes. But the lust, when satisfied, becomes greed, because you want more and more and more and more. Desire becomes intense desire. But when it's not satisfied, becomes wrath, becomes anger. When people are angry, they lose control. That is becoming in a mode of ignorance. So lust is so serious that when it's satisfied, you become greedy. When it's not satisfied, you become angry. Now, how do you elevate lust into a mode of goodness? You see here, it is basically passion that becomes ignorance. But how do you elevate it to a mode of goodness? The answer is by prescribed methods of living and acting. One can use from degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. So here we're talking about when living entities are baffled by prolonged lustful activities, they get fed up, they think enough is enough, I don't want to continue this way. Then they inquire about the Supreme. Who is this Supreme? What is my relationship with him, etc. This will arise when you get fed up of this, being caught in this lustful nonsense. And how do you make lust and wrath spiritualized? By desiring everything for Krishna. Now, Hanuman was very angry with Ravan because Ravan kidnapped Sita. He was very angry. He burned the whole of Lanka. But he did it for Lord Ram. He converted that anger and spiritualized it because he did something for the Lord. Arjuna was very confused, very frustrated, very angry with himself. But when Lord Krishna said, fight as my instrument, do it for me. So that was spiritualized. This is very interesting. Eh? When you desire everything for Krishna in Krishna consciousness, you actually are demonstrating pure love, which is your original state. Original state, pure, is pure love, intense desire to serve Krishna. So this lust actually has a bad side, and if we are stuck here, it's a big problem. But if we gradually work towards it, ultimately it can convert lust into pure love. And you have to, because lust leads to degradation. It's a cause of material entanglement. That is the problem. According to the Bhagavad Gita, there are 3 degrees covering lust. As fire is covered by smoke, what does that mean? It means like the spirit is the fire, the lust is the smoke. It's covering the spirit. The lust is covering the spirit. It is creating a situation where it is not, is making it difficult for us to see the fire, but the fire is there. All right? Mirror is covered by dust. Again, the purpose of the mirror is lost. You can't even see yourself because of the dust. It means the lust is even stronger. As embryo is covered by the womb, it is completely covered. So these are the different degrees of covering of lust described in the Bhagavad Gita. What's the relevance of this? Why is this even discussed? You see, when you look at the object of the fire, mirror, and embryo covered by smoke, dust, and womb, it's compared to consciousness of humans, animals, and trees. In humans, the degree of lust is slight. In animals, medium. In trees is intense. Chance of overcoming is maximum for humans, medium for animals, and really minimum for trees and plants. So we talk about fire, though covered by smoke, still burns to some degree. Similarly, the pure consciousness of human being is covered by lust slightly. and can be conquered by bhakti and able guidance. In the context of the mirror covered by dust does not reflect image properly. That means the mirror cannot be used, though it's known as a mirror. Similarly, consciousness of birds and beasts are covered by lust moderately. But you're talking about embryo, the fetus is covered by the womb. It's like lust cannot even move. The consciousness of tree is covered very deeply. The tree cannot ever reach out to its spiritual existence. So in text 38, this is summarized very nicely. Different stages of covering the lust. So beginning of Krishna consciousness is when you gradually remove the lust. And this is possible because it's compared to consciousness of human being. We are able to rekindle the fire by Krishna consciousness. And over time, the smoke becomes less and less. But if the lust is so strong, it's like the dust covering the meter, we need spiritual methods, which is much more intense. But if it is completely covering, knowledge is completely covered, this is very bad. So once you take on that consciousness of Krishna, you're beginning to remove that covering. So we talked about the characteristics of lust. We talk about cover living entities, pure consciousness. It is a symbol of ignorance. You become ignorant of your true spiritual being, and it's never satisfying. Satisfying lust is like adding fuel to the fire. So because lust is a symbol of ignorance, advancement of material civilization on basis of sense gratification, we see it all the time. People are rich, powerful, we think they're great. Increasing degrees of material existence and so-called happiness is the ultimate enemy for sense enjoyment. So this is the reality. So we find that in a material world, that's all we have. Sense enjoyment, marketing, pushing, and as long as we are concerned, the more we enjoy our senses, the better we are. It becomes shackles of sex life, punishment for living being for being disobedient for laws of God. So that is the character of life. How to conquer? It's a very important question. How to conquer? Now, where is it? Where is it? It is in the senses. It is in the mind and intelligence. That is where this lust is hiding. That's the shelter. So this enemy, lust, has captured very strategic positions in the body. It is in the senses, in the mind, and in the intelligence. Now, we must understand where to attack first. You normally attack the weakest point. So the weakest point is the senses, because it is the easiest to take care of. Send images of desirable, undesirable objects to the mind, and it feels attracted to pleasures, and therefore the senses are the starting point of the desires for sense objects. It is the easiest to conquer. So to overcome, we got to learn from Bhagavad Gita, and as we are doing now, how to overcome it. Start with the senses. The other thing we are worried about is the mind and intelligence. That is something we are concerned, because if it's in the mind and intelligence, it destroys jnana and vijnana. It destroys our knowledge about who we truly are. What is our true purpose? What is consciousness really all about? Where should it be directed? So this is why it is very difficult to control the mind and intelligence, but it's easier to start with the senses. So now we are talking about intelligence. Now it's very, very important to understand this part. So we understand the mind is the center activity of the senses. The mind controls the senses. It's a reservoir of ideas for sense gratification. That's where it starts from. But hang on, who is controlling the mind? The intelligence. So when the intelligence itself becomes lusty, becomes weak, it loses control. The mind becomes controlled by the senses. Now, intelligence becoming weak, the soul acquires the false ego. That is the problem. The lusty intelligence influences the soul to acquire the false ego, and then there is false identification. Identify the self with the matter, addicted to enjoying material, and that controls the mind and senses. Now, once the soul acquires the false ego, identify the body made up of three elements, considers products of body as his kinsman, considers land of birth as worshipable, goes to places of pilgrimage for taking bath, but rather than meeting the devotees, they just think they are gaining time. These are actually false identifications, because we are allowing the intelligence to be weak to a point where the mind is controlled by the senses. So this is where the problem lies. Now, the soul acquiring or believing that it is the body is the starting point of the whole problem of false identification. So it is the lusty intelligence, weak intelligence, that influences the soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus the mind and senses. That is the problem. So here we say one becomes stranger to oneself under the control of false ego. That is exactly what happens. When the intelligence is weak, the soul is identifying itself with the ego. So how to overcome this? Through a process of seva, sadhana, and svadhyaya. What is that? Seva is meant to control the senses. In Hinduism and Sikhism is very common. Seva is selfless service, performed without any expectation of result or award for performing it. We go and serve people who are suffering from flood. We go and give free food. We help people who are old. We help people who are, we just seva. We do things because we want to use our senses for the benefit of others. So when you do seva, your senses, your sense of sight, your sense of touch, your sense of smell, all that senses are being used for the benefit of other people. And when you do that, you cannot use the senses for yourself. That is why in Sikhism, seva is considered a very central theme of life. They're training themselves to control their senses. So when you control the senses, you control the mind. Because the mind is going to follow the senses. So seva is one good way. Now, want to control the mind is a more advanced stage, but it can be done through sadhana. Sadhana is daily spiritual practice, getting up, chanting, conducting prayers, offering prasadam. That is spiritual practice. Why are we doing that? Why do we chant? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Why? Because we are using our sense of sound and our sense of hearing in his service. We want to hear his name. We are fed up of talking about other people and about ourselves. We want to talk about him. And we keep doing it to remind the mind about our true position. That is spiritual practice. So that's how you control the mind. And what about intelligence? How do you control the intelligence? By svadhyaya. That is self-study, especially recitation of Vedas and other sacred texts. When you read the Bhagavad Gita, when you listen to Bhagavad Gita, when you hear the glories of the Lord, that is svadhyaya. You are studying. And all of you are so blessed. I am blessed. We are all blessed because we are engaging in activities that purifies our intelligence so that we realize who we truly are. That is how to conquer lust. So basically, first you regulate the senses in the very beginning, and then only talk about the mind and intelligence. It's always like this. The soul is the most highest level in the hierarchy. The soul controls the intelligence. Intelligence controls the mind controls the senses is definitely more powerful than matter. So it's like from highest to lowest. To control lust, you start by regulating the senses. Look at Lord Krishna's Murti a bit longer. Chant his name a bit longer. Sing your bhajans with a bit more love. Offer prasada more often. So your taste, your sight, your sound, your hearing is more towards Lord Krishna. That is controlling the senses. And then you steady the mind with deliberate spiritual intelligence by doing sadhana, by reading the scriptures, by discussing the pastimes of the Lord. And then gradually you purify the self to realize pure consciousness. So that is the formula which has been prescribed in the Bhagavad Gita. So lovely. So in text 42, this is summarized very nicely, where he says the soul is higher than the intelligence, higher than the mind, and this is the way you start. It says that you have to understand the soul's constitutional position. What is the position of soul? That position is a servitor to Lord Krishna. That is why our soul exists. We are part and parcel of Lord Krishna. That is our position. And we are supposed to completely surrender to the Lord. Under the intelligence, using the intelligence, mind, and direct service. And if we surrender using intelligence to engage the mind in direct service, automatically the senses will follow the dictation of the mind. So that is how the system works. In text 43, this is very beautifully described by describing the step-by-step process. So chapter 3 actually conclusively discusses directed towards Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not the impersonal volumes of the ultimate end. That's why it says, do not give up your work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but gradually develop this consciousness, and then one can situate it in transcendental position, unaffected by mind and senses. But what is stopping us is the greatest enemy, that is the desire for overloading and sense gratification. That is the greatest enemy. And therefore, we have to gradually remove it through this process. So we have a very nice summary of what happens. There's no Krishna consciousness. The soul is not engaged in Krishna consciousness. The senses drags the mind. The mind drags the intelligence. The intelligence drags the soul into sense gratification. Can you see how beautifully this is described? No Krishna consciousness, your sense will drag the mind, so you're gone. That's just lost. How do you overcome this dragging of the mind and intelligence? By regulating the senses. Since the mind and intelligence are difficult to control to begin with, start with the senses. Engage the soul in Krishna consciousness. So attach the lust and mind and intelligence by contemplating on the real identity of being soul that is superior to the dictates of the senses, mind, and intelligence. Practice acting on the platform of spiritual desire. So the desire has to shift from material, intellectual, emotional to spiritual, to transcendental. Only then the intelligence is strengthened. And when the intelligence is strengthened, the mind is engaged in Krishna consciousness, and the mind will engage the senses to be serving the Lord. So we have talked about the characteristics. It's born on the mode of passion, transforms into wrath, anger, ignorance, and forces us to act sinfully. It is really the greatest enemy and covers all living entities' pure consciousness. And we talked about as smoke covers the fire, mirror covers by dust, and embryo covered by womb. It's never satisfied, burns like fire, and these are the sitting places, the sense, mind, and intelligence, and all this covers the knowledge. So as a summary, verse 336 to 343, we have to beware of lust and anger because it is soul's sinful, all-devouring enemy. Through lust, sitting in the senses, the mind and intelligence, the soul's knowledge is covered. By regulating the senses through spiritually strong intelligence, one should fix himself in his pure identity as the servant of Krishna and thereby conquer lust. So we have to always remember that it's important to gain insight into one's personal objective and obstacles in life. What is my objective? Why do I exist? Why am I alive? It is because I want to realize my original consciousness. The soul is life. The soul is life itself. All this lust, anger, greed, envy is powerful as the power you give them. These are conditioned consciousness and can be subdued with spiritually directed intelligence. Now, we're talking about two types of consciousness: original consciousness and conditioned consciousness. What is the difference between the two? Conditioned consciousness is chitta, and original consciousness is chit. You see, we describe the soul as Sat Chit Ananda. Chit is consciousness, original consciousness. Chitta is conditioned. It is how you direct the consciousness. It's like the medium to which you're directing the consciousness. Consciousness originally pure like water, but if we mix water with certain color, it changes. Similarly, consciousness is pure, for the spirit, soul is pure. But the consciousness is changed according to association of material qualities. That is the problem. So we have to be very careful to direct the consciousness in the correct direction. We can get rid of the impurities of the heart by turning our consciousness towards Lord Krishna. With mind, we can think of Krishna and project our consciousness towards him. So to summarize, lust is a perverted reflection of natural love of Lord Krishna. Living entities are part and parcel of the Lord. So by nature, the soul is meant to love the Lord. That is the natural condition. Knowledge of the self and super soul has to be acquired from the Lord himself for us to do this. If we don't get knowledge of who we truly are and what our true position is and how we're supposed to lead our life, we can never convert lust into love. That knowledge has to be acquired. We have to also engage in regulative principles of devotional service to control the senses so that we can ultimately control the mind and strengthen the intelligence. There is a lovely verse in chapter 10, verse 9. Mat chitta mat gata prana. The consciousness of my devotees is fixed on me. So when we talk of chitta, chitta is where you direct the consciousness. When you direct the consciousness towards Krishna, inward and not outward, you are mastering the art of converting lust into pure love. And that is the whole purpose of our existence. And that is how karma yoga really works. What we must really remember, what is the key takeaway from today is this. The first key takeaway is that we have to recognize lust as a perverted reflection of natural love for Krishna. We have to realize that all living entities are part and parcel of the Lord and are meant to serve the Lord. That is important to realize. We also must acquire the knowledge of self and super self as explained by the Lord himself. And we have to follow the regulative principles of devotional service. We can do that. Our life would be blissful as it is meant to be, because the soul is blissful and will remain blissful forever. So we have come to the end of chapter 3. I'm going to flash the entire chapter summary here so that we can recap everything slowly. The topic starts by Arjuna asking the Lord Krishna, why does he want him to fight? Because the Lord recommended Buddhi Yoga and the Lord condemned fruitive activities. So Arjuna confuses Buddhi Yoga as retirement from active life. And according to Arjuna, the war was a fruitive activity. So he is confused. So Lord Krishna says he has actually recommended one process with two stages, that is karma, jnana. Lord Krishna replies that there are two ways to realize the self. One is Sankhya Yoga, analytical study, and Karma Yoga, Niskama Karma, Buddhi Yoga. These are two ways. This way, Sankhya Yoga is an analytical study. The soul is active by nature. Giving up work without purification or materialistic contamination will not get perfection because the soul is very active. You can stop things, but your mind won't stop. So one will be a pretender and the senses may be restrained, but the mind will dwell. So that is the problem. So it's recommended that we engage in karma yoga, niskama karma, buddhi yoga. Because performing work in devotion, one's prescribed duty is better than not performing any work. What is the result? Result is the work in devotion performed for satisfaction of Vishnu will cause the heart, will cleanse the heart of materialistic people and make them free from bondage. That's the result. This is what is recommended. But if people are ignorant, they don't do that. They remain in that karma kanda stage. They continue enjoying the pleasures of the senses. And that is leading to lust, which is the all-devouring enemy, which lies in the senses, in the mind, and intelligence. And to overcome it, we need to regulate the senses, we need to engage in sadhana, and we need to read spiritual practices. So that is the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. Work only for Lord Krishna, without sense of self-motivation, following the teachings, without envy, free from lethargy and fight. And by doing that, you actually overcome lust. So this is how the entire chapter has been designed. And I think it is a beautiful rendition of the whole concept of karma yoga. We begin to understand how the focus has been on ensuring that work is done to satisfy our responsibilities that are prescribed at a material and spiritual level on an ongoing basis, so that when we work, when we do our duties, we are also purifying our senses. But we have to watch out for that obstacle, that enemy, that thing that stops us from doing that. That stops us from purifying our consciousness, stops us from reaching out to do what we are meant to do, that is to serve Lord Krishna. And that is the desire to satisfy ourselves, because our intelligence is weakened and the soul now identifies with the false ego, leading to all these problems. All right? Okay. Are there any questions? Any comments? Did you find it interesting? Did you think it makes a lot of sense? Has it improved your understanding? I'm sure many of you have gone through this chapter many, many times. But I think if we look at it in totality, it's a lovely, lovely way to wrap up this session. All right, so I'm open to questions. Anybody? Can't we have both material and spiritual pleasure? It's like, can we have love and lust at the same time? Can you have fire and water together? It's one and the other, opposite. So if you have material pleasures, you are putting fuel to the fire, and it becomes more and more and more, and you have more and more and more desires. How can you have spiritual pleasure if you have material pleasure? For spiritual pleasure, you need to go this way. You need to go inwards. You need to go back to the soul. So can you go to Johor Bahru and Ipoh at the same time from KL? No, you either go Johor Bahru or Ipoh. You got to decide which way to go. Because the opposite. So when we know that we are already enjoying ourselves because we are in this world, we are contaminated material nature, we are already having that desires. It's not wrong, it's just that we must recognize it is a perverted permutation of the love for Krishna. It's perverted, it's a permutation. All you got to do is bring it back. And then you get the real pleasure, all right? So that is my answer to the question of, can't we have both material and spiritual pleasure? Why can't enjoyment be just that, enjoyment without lust? What is equated with lust? That's a great question. What do you enjoy? You enjoy anything, right? You can enjoy music, you can enjoy a drink, that's fine. Enjoyment is great, but you're doing it for yourself. And when you do something for yourself, you are not focusing on your true purpose. And that is to serve the senses of the Lord. So it's either you serve your senses or serve the senses of the Lord. Of course, you can say, I just want to continue serving. Fine. Then you continue being born, you die, old age, disease, and it goes on and on and on. Of course, you can enjoy, do the nice things, pray, be good. You get elevated to higher planets. You enjoy becoming a lovely life. Then after your nice, wonderful time in the heavenly planets are over, you come back to earth. Then you go back again, come back again. It's like going up and down, upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, basement, upstairs, downstairs. That's it. If you're happy, fine, no issue. The question is this: how to break from this cycle? How to get out? It's like you're on Earth and you want to go to another planet. You need a rocket that is very strong to beat the gravity. And that gravity, what is that gravity? Doubts, desires, attachments, that's gravity. You need to push until you beat the gravity, enough fuel, enough power. Then you reach the outer surface, no gravity. Oh, fantastic, there's no gravity. But you're not reaching the other planet, you're just at the surface. Is that your intent? If you want to stay at the surface, you can stay there. After some time, you get pulled down by gravity again. So it's like negative to zero to positive. Now you need another booster when you come out of the gravity force to continue onward to your final destination. So again, it's a question of what do you want in life? Do we want to go back? Do we want to relish our true original position? Or do we want to stay stuck in this world? That's why we have to make a call. Okay? All right. If anybody else has some comments to answer this question, I'm very happy to listen because, I don't have all the answers. I'm sure some of you can give even better answers than I can. If you'd like to share on why can't we have both material and spiritual pleasure, somebody else like to answer the question, or why can't enjoyment be just that, enjoyment? I've given my thoughts. If anybody else wants to contribute? No? Okay, fine. Any overall comments on the session? Are you happy with the session? Can we continue like this? Do you want to make some changes? No? Okay, I'm getting another message. Everybody seems to be too quiet. What is that you're grappling with? What is that you're grappling with? I'm still grappling with today's session. There's nothing to grapple. It's very simple. I want to go somewhere and somebody tells me how to go there, but also tells me, be careful, when you go there, there is a block, there are problems. You got to overcome those problems. And the biggest problem is lust. And how to do it is resolved. All right? Okay. So yes, I will get the recording of the last session finalized and I'll post it in the chat box. And this session as well is being recorded. And I'll be sending it to you. I'll continue this on a weekly basis. Next week, we'll be covering Jnana Yoga, that is the yoga of knowledge acquisition. Amazing topic. And I look forward to having you back again. Please invite your friends and your relatives or your whoever to listen to this session. And do go to the Geeta Ashram Malaysia to relish some of those wonderful prayers that we have, the slokas that are being recited, because that is a place where you can actually connect with Lord Krishna. That is when you see him. You engage your eyes, your sense of sight to look at him. You listen about him. You taste his prasadam. You bow in front of him. That is the best way to use your senses, by going to where he resides, to the temples, to the Geeta Ashram, to wherever he is. And I can tell you, he'll be so happy to see you there. With that, I end today's session. Thank you very much. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Gurudev.